easy. It may be because I'm old, though. I miss Sharon in my community. They help me get the groceries out of the car. And I'm talking about whites and blacks and Hispanics, a lot of Hispanic workers, um, the Indian women with their little dots on the forehead. I mean, it's just a diversified culture, and I'm so glad I lived to see it. I'm so glad, thank you, Lord, that I lived to see it. And right now I'm in bereavement because my friend, Sharon Watson Devonish, expired on the 4th of July. And this time, and she was a Clark College student. And of course, we remained friends all these years. I went to Frank L. Stanton Elementary School with her. Prior to that, she went to Oglethorpe Elementary School. In Atlanta, Oglethorpe Elementary School was the private school back in the day for affluent blacks. And she and I shared so much history. But there's hope. There's hope. When Dr. King said, I may not get there with you, we're on our way. I can't say we have arrived, but we are on our way. And I'm just so glad to have been born black and female. Well, correction, I was born colored, because we were colored back then. Born colored and female in the United States of America. Because my sorority now, Delta Sigma Theta, is heavily involved in trying to do some empowerment of women because of the atrocities that are happening to females all over the world. I know I'm kind of garrulous, but the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee was an engine, and it was the little engine that could, and it did. And President Barack Obama campaigned on, yes, we can. So we can say, yes, we did. And we're going to keep on doing. So, I don't know. I used to grade papers, and I would mark my students down if they were desultory and unorganized. And I realize now I have just been all around Robin Hood's barn. So if you want to bring me back to a point.
No, you are doing excellent. You've hit so many of the points that are already here. So you did mention the Appeal for Human Rights. Can you talk a little bit more about your involvement with that?
Well, basically there was a brainstorming in terms of the needs of the community. And at that time, the idea for education was to gear students up so that they could either choose of what we called a vocation or choose to go into college to choose a profession. And but the problem was there were no jobs. There were no jobs. In fact, when I look back on it, the teachers that we had were some of the brightest minds on the planet, African Americans. We were colored back then. The colored teachers were wonderful. But there were no jobs for them. You either had to work at the post office or at one of the car companies or teach school or wait tables. But there were no jobs. There were no jobs. So the job issue was paramount. And Ruby Doris Smith, I think, contributed a lot to the writing in terms of the appeal for human rights. Charlene Hunter Galt lived on Mosley Place, right near Mathewson Place, where I lived, too. And, of course, she showed those signs of journalism even back in the day, too. I went to Frank L. Stanton Elementary School, where I went. But the writing of that document reflected the times with the jobs, the education, and voters' rights. Those were the three main issues. And of course, with education, the idea then was to really prepare students to come out and become gainfully employed. And back in the day, too, we had that discrimination among ourselves, too. My mom, of course, we all have the same history, but my great-grandmother was mulatto. So my mom was fair-skinned, my sister is fair-skinned. I'm about the darkest one. And at Morris Brown College, too, even if you became a queen, I was Miss Morris Brown 1963-64, and I was the darkest one that rode on the float, because we used to discriminate against each other. It was like the fairer your skin, the more you were accepted. And even my cousin got a job. Her name was Clara Jeanette Lamar. They hired her to work in Walgreens just because of her fair skin. And my sister got a job at the Kaplan's 5 and 10 cent store there on Edgewood that runs parallel to Auburn Avenue. And she got the job because of her fair skin, my sister. They hired her. That year, I couldn't find a job anywhere. Thank God for Lottie Watkins and the Atlanta Inquirer, because at least I got a job, and back then I made $25 a week. But you either had to work as a domestic. There were no jobs. They were not to be had. You know, they weren't available. And the ones that were available, they discriminated against. They hired some guys and some girls at the banks. But that's because they had the fair skin and they would blend in. And even my friend who's gone on now, Sharon Watson Devon, she was a pioneer and flew as a flight attendant for TWA. And they hired her because she was fair skinned. My high school class of Washington High School, 1960, is made up of pioneers all around, because Ronald Yancey finished Georgia Tech in 1964. He had to have an armed guard to go with him across to pick up his degree. But look at God, look at God. My own son was able to finish Georgia Tech, and Robert White III, and John Lewis was the speaker on the day of his commencement in the stadium over there at Georgia Tech. So look at how we're moving forward. I say the word is excelsior. Onward and upward. That's where we are now. Onward and upward. Onward and upward. In terms of education, there were two schools of thought. Some people thought that you should be really prepared academically, and some other people thought that you needed to have a bread and butter skill. You needed to have something you could do, because folks didn't care how much you knew and what you know. They want to know what you can do. And so Carver High School was very good in training students when it came to cosmetology, auto mechanics. And I understand even now they have EMS over there where they teach you how to become the person to respond in case of an emergency. But the whole idea was Well, you know, there's just as much dignity in tilling tilling the soil as there is in writing a poem. We all know that. And we know a man who ignores his history is doomed to repeat it. All of the sages of our day have taught us all of that. But in my mind's eye, I think that we need to do all of the above. We need to make sure that in education that people tap into their own gift. And that's another thing. I had a chance to work with the Challenge Program for Gifted Students for 10 years. I served 5 high schools, Therrell, Mays, Turner, Harp, and Brown high schools, during the magnet school concept in education. And that was to group like minds who were on the same path. And so at Therrell High School, they had the law and government magnet. And the students were concentrating on what it took to get into forensic issues, and also the debating with the debate team and with the quiz bowl team and those kinds of things. And they even have a simulated courtroom over there at Therrell High School now, and if you walk in there, you're thinking the real thing, because that's how important it was to get these students who were leaning toward that path to do that. Then when you leave Therrell High School, I would go to Benjamin E. Mays High School, and there we had math